Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome, Stephen. Welcome, Emily. Welcome, David. We're going to get started in just a moment as people are filtering through. Hi, Esther. Welcome. This is Pamela Levitt on the other side. Just sharing some slides with you. Chag Sameach, everyone. Welcome to our conversation today around Sukkah City, the film, with our special guest, George Astrow. We're just going to wait a couple of moments for some of the attendees to come in. Hey, everybody, welcome. We're going to get started in just a moment. This is Pamela Levitt. Welcome to the SJCC and the Seattle Jewish Film Festival. We had about 50 people or more watch the film, so I'm hoping we'll have a rich discussion around the sukkah. We're just going to start in just a moment. I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. If everyone wants to take it, if you guys can hear me, go ahead and just throw into the chat. I always am a little concerned that I'm speaking into the void. So please let me know if you guys can hear me just by throwing a little hello into the chat. Oh, good. I see folks are starting to take the poll, which I love. There's 3 questions, by the way, so make sure that you scroll down all the way to the bottom so I can see who's there. All right. Well, welcome. I imagine that some folks are going to stroll in. This is, the nature of free programs. You never know who's going to show up. Our lives are so busy and overtaken with so much right now. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the video and just welcome everyone. All right. Hi, everyone. All right, give me just one moment. Hello and welcome, everyone. I've got a poll up. This is Pamela Levitt, the director of the Strom Jewish Community Center Arts and Ideas Programs, and of course, the Seattle Jewish Film Festival. I'm so glad that you're joining us today, and Chag Sameach to everyone. I hope that you are having a safe and healthy Sukkot and a meaningful new year. I hope that you are safe and are not as stressed due to the situation and politically and otherwise. But I'm so glad that you decided to join us today. We're going to have about an hour-long, maybe 45-minute conversation with some Q&A, and wanted to make sure that everyone who's in has taken the poll, and I'll share the results in just a moment. I wanted to just welcome all of you. I'm not sure, it looks like some of you have seen the film, so I'm going to end the poll, make sure you've taken it. I'm going to go ahead and share this right now. All right, I'm going to share the results. And before I introduce our special guest, it's really interesting. I love this. Yes, have you ever built your own sukkah? So 67% of you, 2 out of 3, or you've assisted with others. I think that's amazing. So nobody said that they have never built or participated in sukkah making. So that's amazing. Also, if you have ever built or been in someone else's sukkah, was it a prefab or self-designed? Similarly, I'm sort of amazed. And of course, today we're going to be speaking with someone who has been making his own backyard sukkahs for many years and has a bit of a unique perspective on it, George. But I think it's really interesting. And then PVC piping. Today I was trying to make the decision if I order a kit or just maybe I'll be inspired today, and that might be part of our conversation. So I'm curious to also know, it sounds like maybe not everybody knew all of the architectural rules. I have one more poll, I think. And so let me see, and I think it was just simply, maybe let me know in the chat if you've seen the film already, or if you still have to watch the film. We're going to use the chat since we're an intimate group today. And I'm going to close this poll out, everybody. Okay, well, welcome. I'd like to actually introduce our guest today. Please welcome George Astrow, who is the principal of Velocipede Architects. And he and I have an interesting history together. Besides being a lecturer on green building in this area and everything, we actually met uniquely a number of years ago when we did an exhibit during the Seattle Jewish Film Festival called Tikkunim, and we featured environmental artists in the community. And I just wanted to share with you all a photo of, oh gosh, let's see where I can find it now, of my daughters who were inside of this, of George's recycled sukkah, which actually turned out to be the entry for the SUKKAH CITY competition. So maybe I could invite George to kind of join us right now. And please tell us just a little bit. George, can you join us so we can see and hear from you? Welcome. So nice to see you. So we do have a little bit of a gem in our midst that you were part of this amazing competition. What can you tell us about that particular sukkah, and why did you enter it in that competition? How did you learn about the SUKKAH CITY competition?
Oh, thank you for, very nice to be here. Hopefully everyone can hear me. It was 10 years ago, and my memory gets fuzzier each year, so I don't exactly remember how I heard about the SUKKAH CITY competition. Possibly from you, Pamela, I'm not sure. But it was pretty well advertised, and I think it was somewhat international in scope. They got entries from Germany and England and so forth. So the reason I used that particular sukkah was two things. One, it was ready at hand and finished. And the second was that it's one of my favorites. It's certainly by that time, that was 10 years ago, it was one of my favorites that I ever built, just a pure cube out of a single material. So I thought it would be the kind of thing that a jury like that would appreciate.
I think it's really fascinating. I don't know, again, if everybody here who is on the Zoom has actually seen the film. I did want to share with everyone, kind of what your particular, that's what I need. I need a glass of wine now in the sukkah. That's a beautiful thing. I did want to share the panel that was part of this sukkah. But what's interesting is that here, can everybody see it? Can you see what I just shared on the screen? I wanted you just to, tell us a little bit about the sukkah in general. And I don't want to assume most people are familiar with it, but this is a much more traditional sukkah, but what seems to be hidden is the notion of the recycling part of it. And that's a sort of your unique spin on sukkahs. And for 20 years, we're going to show a slideshow at the end here of recycled sukkahs, but a lot of the entries were extremely elaborate, right? That they had crazy designs and, materials. This one was one of the rejects that didn't make it to the last 12. I don't want to call them rejects, but I wouldn't say, and I think it's so interesting also how these figures are always Black Hasidic figures, and many of these international, images. We'll talk about some of these in a moment, but if you could tell us a little bit about just your spin on the sukkah in general.
All sukkahs, I see. Yeah. So, to me, it's temporary is probably the most important part. It's up for only a week, and I love that it. Obviously it's hit or miss in Seattle, but you're supposed to be outside. Dining al fresco is always kind of fun. It just makes an ordinary meal that much more festive and fun, unless of course it's raining. And then it's interesting to me, a number of years ago, they live off their land, their subsistence farmers and fishermen. They all have gardens immediately surrounding their house and village from which they eat daily, but then they have gardens that half a day or even a day's walk away, say. And so they will build sukkah-like structures, little harvest shelters, because they have to walk a day, spend a week out there harvesting, and then return. Sorry, I've got an airplane overhead.
Oh, that's okay. Well, I guess I wondered, I don't know how many entries there were. I probably looked through about 300 to 500 entries. They selected,
I think that's right,
12. I wanted to play a short video for everyone, just in case you haven't seen the film, that will give you a sense, if you're not familiar with Union Square as well. It's sort of a hustle bustle area where there's a farmers market in the heart of New York City. It's right near the 14th Street. It's sort of in what used to be the edge of the East Village, kind of heading towards the Flatiron District. And it's quite a hub. There was some controversy, which I was going to ask you about a little bit. I know you've seen the film. I just don't know how long it's been since you've seen it. But about minute 13, we get to see your sukkah, just in case anybody wants to relook at it. You actually do have a moment in the film. But I think one of the things the filmmaker, Jason Hutt, did really beautifully was he had so many wonderful voices, but he focused so deeply in on each of the designs that we didn't really get to see this image. So I wanted to share this with everyone, and then we're going to look at some of the entries. And as an architect, I would love to get perspective on some of these designs and then some of the objects, and then we'll go ahead and talk a little bit about yours. And I think it's amazing, the pride I think New York City also felt having sukkahs come into the heart of downtown. Here we go.
I believe they were up for just 2 days or something like that. Yeah, this one with the log, it didn't do it for me. Sorry, too abstract, too conceptual, and just not a thing of beauty, if you ask me. The fuzzy hair I really liked, the cracked open ball. I thought this was beautiful, big basket weave.
The interactivity I think is really quite incredible in some of them.
Yeah. Overall, I was struck with the extreme complexity of the entries, but I guess that's what you get. You set a bunch of international architects to the task. Also, I like using wood as a natural material, particularly it's a nice, everyone appreciates wood. It's a nice tactile material. It's beautiful just in and of itself. So and then I think just this one particularly did a beautiful job with it. I mean, I just would be afraid to go inside the log one.
Well, I noticed that no one could enter it. So it's sort of, defeated the point.
Yeah, and to me that it should be inviting and welcoming. You should want to be inside and then experience the inside as well as the outside. They're not just a sculpture object to look at. They're sculpture to inhabit and go inside. And I think that's a really important feature. This one I thought was fantastic. It's, very complex. I love the concept behind this one, the cardboard signs.
I'm going to stop sharing there. So I guess what I wanted to start off with, giving everyone just a feel for some of these incredible sukkahs. I think what struck me in the film is there's a moment where they say that Sukkot is the only time that there's a mention of an architectural requirement for the holiday. And so I'm kind of wondering what those requirements are, if you could outline them, since you've also been building them. What are, and where were they stretched by some of these architects? Because I think I struggled a little bit with the halachic legal element, but what are the requirements that one has to have, and what are the things that you just saw that fulfilled or didn't fulfill them?
Sure. And as you pointed out, I'm not a rabbi, so this is my understanding, but I may have some aspects wrong. It needs to have 3 walls. 4th wall can be open or not. The roof must be cut from living branches, so green material. And the branches must be spaced apart. Need not be branches, it could be corn stalks, whatever, but living material. Spaced apart sufficiently that you can see the stars from within. It shouldn't be so dense that you're actually covered. That's pretty much all I know. That those are I add an additional requirement to my own sukkahs that they be made from natural recycled materials, but that's not in Torah. And then, the artists, I guess the architects in the competition in Union Square, they took creative license. Many of them did not have, branches cut from, living branches for the roof, for the shkach. Okay, I guess it was a chance to explore it. I thought it would have been, the rules are so few and so simple that I thought it would have been good that they actually hold to them. But I've also learned over the years in architectural competitions that the people who strictly adhere to the rules don't win. It's the people who break the rules and stretch them. They're the ones who usually get the nod. So there you go.
It's really interesting.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the other things that I took away were that it needed to have more shadow than light, which I thought was an interesting comment I didn't know about.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
There was also something about it reaching towards the sky. And so as I share just a couple of these, other images on the screen share in just a moment, I thought that some of them, like you said, that there were really, people went out. I don't know, it sounded like there was a decent budget. This was Reboot in New York City. They had a pretty decent budget for it. So they received some of the judges, or some of, if I recall, George, you would know better than I, some of the world-renowned architects, correct? They were Columbia University, and this was quite an impressive panel of judges. But
Paul Goldberger, the longtime critic of the New York Times architectural section. Yeah. No, it was a heavyweight jury, no question.
It was a heavyweight jury. This one, I'm showing you now some of the rejects, because I thought this was interesting. A number of the rejected, and I can throw in the chat, everyone, and I'll get to your questions. There were you can see every single panel of these entries on the SUKKAH City website, and I'll throw into they still have all of the panels up, and each one is described meticulously, the entry. This one is actually IV bags of blood. And I thought to myself that there is an Exodus story here, which was really about kind of the blood of the people living on year by year. I thought it was fascinating. The sense of, somebody asked, what about natural materials versus synthetic materials? Is there anything that you can think of? Obviously you choose to do it with natural materials and recycled materials, but you and I, if you recall it, you probably blotted it from your memory, but you and I together had a For Culture installation exhibit that we did. It was kind of a disaster a number of years ago, in which yes, that was crazy. We, George and I, and you were game and such a champ, put together at Washington Hall a recycled sukkah made from couches. Can you recall, when's the last time that you used a material that was synthetic like that?
Probably that was the only time. So every summer I start looking around for source materials, and sometimes I have a choice, sometimes I don't. But I noticed that at every street corner in my neighborhood was discarded furniture. And I thought, well, that's certainly something that it's available, and I thought I'd try to use it. So
yeah, I mean, I think that the one thing that was interesting is that the couches also embodied the notion of welcoming the stranger, right? You welcome people into your home, into your sukkah. the notion of inviting in guests and the stranger it's a very kind of Elijah, kind of symbolic,
Right.
folkloric, Herschel Ostropolia, who is of course from Yiddish folklore. You never know who the Lamed Vavnik is going to be, the brilliant mind that shows up at your door. And so there is an element of those couches, I think, that really said, come to my living room. But anyhow, so I'm looking here at this one was a crown sukkah.
Mm-hmm.
Not one finalist, indicating the Dreimal, the crown hat of the Bubover and Satmar Jews of Brooklyn. I thought it was really interesting how some of these other interpretations, this was actually winner of the entire competition, the fractured bubble. And your response when I showed it to you beforehand was wow. So I'm kind of wondering, what's that wow coming from?
For me? Oh, just it, you know, they took the idea of they cut a bunch of reeds, I guess, and they surrounded the structure with them rather than limiting them to just the horizontal roof plane. And I thought that was a very interesting choice. And then because it's open, it invites you to come inside. And then when you go inside, as I think is good, you have a completely different experience. The material is different, the structure is there, and it's very detailed, and you can look at it up close. So to me, it's satisfying both from a distance and then inside, and then just materially. It's fun. Yeah.
So someone threw into the chat who saw the film, and we don't want to give away a whole lot because it's not a dramatic film, so it's not like there was a major arc plot around this. But I don't know if you remember, George, there was some controversy over this proposal of a subway sukkah. Does that ring a bell? Or maybe I can remind you, but yeah, what do you remember about that? And some people really liked it, and the woman, Steve, you're not a woman, but Steve mentioned that he really liked the subway sukkah. But what was the controversy around it exactly? I'm not sure I really followed it.
You know, I guess I had a hard time as well. The film clearly depicted that it was controversial, and I think they split the jury on this one. Half wanted to include it, half didn't feel it was appropriate, and I think in the end they remanded it to an alternate status and ended up not using it. But I thought it was brilliant. I thought, you use structure that's already there. You just simply put a roof over something that people, thousands of people go through every day, and it completely changes your perception of it. And I thought it was fine. And
it is transient.
Yeah. Yeah, and at the same time, you can't occupy it by sitting on the steps, as illustrated in the drawing there.
Yeah.
And I think one of the objections was well, you're obstructing a way out of a public transit. It's like there's 12 other entrances. You don't have to use this one. So I thought it was inspired. Yeah.
I think it's kind of interesting. Obviously, the holiday of Sukkot is also filled with other actions that one does, right? There's an action of shaking the etrog and this perfect notion of the lulav, the lulav and the etrog being the lemon-like, fruit that must be perfect, and there's a whole lot of lore around it of perfection. So I think what's interesting is I think that the sukkah in many ways is an incredibly imperfect structure, right? You can see the stars, but it won't keep it, the rain will come right through, right? If you're sitting outside, it's not going, you sleep in it, and yet it's probably freezing. I'm just wondering, how do you kind of manage those two things of the perfection and the ritual with this transient hut dwelling that seems so fragile? And I don't know what your thoughts are and we're going to start looking at some of the sukkahs that you've built over the years. Somebody also put in, the subway is like Israelites wandering in the desert. Thank you, Emily. A symbol of journey. So I'm actually going to invite everyone who's either seen the film or built a sukkah, please throw your comments in there, because We're not on a Zoom where we can see each other's faces, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. So George, what do you think about this experience of the temporary of this and the imperfect nature of the sukkah itself, and what does it say about
I
it?
think that's inherent to the whole thing. I mean, it's again going back to it. It's a hut built in the field by agricultural workers for temporary use. I'm sure it's just thrown up casually, just enough to sort of keep the wind off, and so you can sleep there as you're working. So I don't see it as a perfect perfect structure at all. I think imperfection is inherent in it. I'm sort of meticulous by nature. That's just my personality. Is probably one of the reasons I'm an architect. So I tend to make sure the boards are straight and the screws are put in just right. But I let it be a little crooked, and it's fine. So kind of depends on what I'm making each year.
Can you just give us some perspective on what you just said about sort of the architecture? Obviously, this is a story not just of Sukkot. Sukkot is the framework of this, but the architects who tried to inhabit and interpret what a sukkah is, many of them were not Jewish. Many of them, this was the first time they had ever heard of it. I'm just wondering about, from an architectural standpoint, are competitions like this typical, that architects from all over the world are challenged to do an entry, almost an artistic? Was this so unusual? I had no context for that at all. Is this a regular thing that architects can enter into competitions and build structures?
Yeah, I guess there's sort of two flavors. One is you'll take a high prestige project, say the Smithsonian National Museum for the American Indians, something like that, and they'll either have an open competition or they'll have an invited competition shortlist. And then sometimes, typically architects will get paid to develop a design, but often not. It's part of their marketing expense. And it's a pretty classic way to win a project and win a prestige job. And then there's also ones that are just ideas. I mean, one of the most famous ones was the Chicago Tribune Tower in Chicago, well, obviously in Chicago. I think that was in 1929. There was an international competition for that. It's noted for being happening right at the dividing line between traditional architecture and the start of modernism. And so about half the designs are, very classic traditional buildings, and others are cutting edge modern, particularly for that time. The Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. Drew, thousands of entries. I mean, it was a massively popular competition. So yeah, these happen all the time. So I think, staging it as a competition made perfect sense. And because it's such a discrete little object, it was, students could enter. You didn't have to be a professional. You didn't have to have a lot of horsepower in your firm to be able to participate. So you really drew a nice breadth of entries. And I think it made it fun. I think towards the end of the film, Paul Goldberger says, my gosh, I don't know why anyone hasn't done this before. It's such an obvious thing to do. So,
it's interesting from my perspective, in my more academic world, having studied World's Fairs. I mean, World's Fairs were at one point a place where architects really showed off the White City or the exposition. Yeah. And these were architectural spaces that, were inhabited, and obviously memorials, and Jewish, international artists have obviously built memorials all over the world. I highly recommend James Young's book, if you all have not read it, which is about memorials and their meanings. It's one of the most fascinating reads for anyone who's thought about Holocaust memorials in particular, and the hundreds and hundreds of years. I wrote an article many years ago about the Jewish Museum, the architecture of the Jewish Museum in New York City, the Museum of Jewish Heritage. And while I don't want to flout everybody, go read it because it was a very early article that I wrote, I found 28 years of architectural blueprints. They had so much trouble deciding who the architect would be for this Museum of Jewish Heritage, because it was competing against grander projects. And it was a fascinating, architecture can be really, we all inhabit the space, right? And that's kind of what happens in a sukkah. So maybe we can look a little bit at your sukkahs over the years and see how you've thought about it. But I do think you probably are working specifically with the materials that are at hand for you. But I thought it was just so fascinating, this film, and somebody asked some questions too about the material of the sukkah. And the last thing I'll just say about that article that I wrote was that was part of the controversy, is that what is the material that signifies, it's so significant to people what you're inhabiting in this physical space, down to, is it going to be white or is it going to be octagonal? And the meaning of these, do you rise up and see the sun, or do you go down and see the dearth and the nadir? And so I'm a real, have not spent a lot of time in the architectural circles, but I'm sure you've thought a lot about these competitions and the meaning of architectural space and its significance. So, yeah. So I was going to say, I'd love to hear a little bit more as we start to show some images. And I threw in the chat the SUKKAH City window. George, you've been building since 1998 in your backyard, recycled sukkah. Is Sukkot like your ultimate holiday, as bringing together your love of architecture and whatever Jewish practices you have? When did that start, and how did your building these Sukkot start in your backyard, sukkahs?
Sure. Yeah. So a couple questions there. I'll respond to in sequence. Yes, it is my ultimate holiday. What's not to like? I get to build something. We get to have guests over every night, and on the weekends we, have them over for lunch as well. So it's just one extended, dinner party. There's no food restrictions. There's no fasting. You don't have to spend all day in shul. It's just nothing but pure fun, and so I love it. And then I do like making things with my hands. So it really appealed to me. The one at the top of your screen now is actually my first one. That was in 1987. Just got married. That was in Vermont. We were renting the upstairs of an old house. My wife was finishing at UVM. I persuaded the landlord that I wanted to make this thing and sort of described it to him. And he was a little bit skeptical, but he was a nice guy. And he thought, okay, I'll let him do it. I explained it was only up for a week. Not particularly halakhically correct, but it was just the idea I had at the time, compression and tension. I built it. I was going to take it down. He did not let me do that. He said he wanted it to stay up. He left it through the winter. He's a photographer. He took pictures in the snow. He was just completely captivated by it. So that was the first one. And then, we traveled for a while overseas. I actually built one out of bamboo in Fiji. To the interest of the villagers. Actually, we hosted the Israeli ambassador to Fiji in our sukkah that year. That was kind of fun. Then we lived in an apartment. We first moved to Seattle, and finally we got to a house where we could build one in our yard. We don't have a backyard. We actually build ours in our front yard.
I just noticed
our neighbors
that. It's
now
right.
know.
Yeah, it's amazing.
We are perfectly crazy, but they've now realized that sometime around this time of year, sometime before Halloween, in the beginning of school, between those bookmarks, George is going to build this crazy thing in the front yard, and we're just going to put up with it.
So I'm showing everyone here so many years. I was wondering about the stairs. So this is literally the front stoop to your house. So you're really... Yeah. You're out there, you're announcing this is structure, bring it on. I'm sure your neighbors stop by and are intrigued.
All the joggers and dog walkers. Yeah. And, while I'm building it, people say, what are you doing? And I'll explain, this is called a sukkah. And I would say 1 in 4 are like, oh yeah, we're Jewish. Okay. That's what I thought it might be. Or, oh, I've seen one, or my neighbors did one, or whatever. And others kind of nod and go, okay, that's interesting.
There's the recycled couch sukkah.
Right.
It is amazing. So I guess what I'm wondering, like, if you go to Brooklyn, right, and in the film they show quite a lot that every single porch, Canarsie, Williamsburg, Borough Park, everyone's got the prefab, they've got the PVC piping and,
right.
some kind of walled structure, and they're everywhere. This is not everywhere in Seattle.
Well, Seward Park actually has quite a few. If you go around this week, you'll see them, put on every block.
Yes. That's true. I still think if you want to pull out, tell me which ones maybe we could explore. I'm curious to know if you'll take us on a little bit of a tour of these sukkahs that you've made over the years and which
Sure.
ones you're interested in maybe highlighting.
Sure. Why don't you do 2017? So again, I'm very dependent, the design is dependent upon what materials I have available. In this case, a client was just demolishing a metal structure, so it had metal roofing and metal armatures holding it up. First time and only time I've built one out of metal. And then we had a student living with us at the time, an art student, and she was using these colorful acrylic panels. So kind of inspired by the Air Force Academy Chapel, if people know that, in Colorado Springs. It's just two walls of metal roofing, which form the sides. And then the third wall are these acrylic panels, kind of look like a stained glass window. And I just, you know, again, I tend to build fairly geometrically, fairly simply. But you know, the quality of the light in there was just terrific. And I know this one, I just like it. It came out. It was a lot of fun to be in.
It's really beautiful. It's really the stained glass effect. And here's your daughter, I'm assuming, who's in on the job here. Is somebody?
No, actually, that's our art student who's living with us. I have two sons.
Ah,
They feature in some of the other ones.
got it.
But
It's
yeah,
amazing.
so this was, you know, this is where it came from. So yeah.
So is there another one you'd
one,
like to tell us about?
Sure. 2016 would probably be useful.
So someone asked in the chat also if you had a response or thought, you know, what your thoughts were on the one made of cardboard with all of the homeless signs. I mean, that was really an incredible structure. And obviously I'm seeing here some signs as well. So tell us about this.
Sure. Well, in terms of the cardboard one, I guess I was wondering what the donors did when they had their cardboard signs taken away. But I think as I understand it, they were given, you know, a gift certificate or some food or whatever in exchange for giving up their sign. So no, I thought that was good. I think, I mean, this one here on the screen is somewhat political too. These were election placards. They litter our city every 4 years, every 2 years. I still have these. I'm waiting for them to be recyclable. But I just thought, here's a material that's abundant at this time of year. It was 2016, before we all knew. And these were the losers in the primary. So I went around and I took their signs, you know, and I turned them upside down to sort of indicate they hadn't moved on to the general election. There's 50 of them, one for each state. And you know, just it was an available material. Like I said, I'm always looking around for available materials. So this was around.
So yeah, what struck me a little bit about, obviously, you know, Sukkot is also known as the Feast of the Tabernacles, and you know, that holiday, you know, of 7 days long, is meant to, you know, is also the Festival of Shelters, all these things. So the homelessness sign one felt a little disembodied for me, of taking the signs but not necessarily sheltering the human. And so I struggled a little bit with the presentational nature of it. I also struggled with the log one, because it was built for beauty and striking, but it seemed too unsafe to inhabit. So that's where some of the competitors, I think, really had interesting concepts, but didn't necessarily fill the mitzvah for me of the holiday itself, of inviting people in. Neither one of them seemed to fully incorporate that notion. So I love this. Obviously, we're in a political moment now. So, but the notion of the losers is really, it's giving them an upside down, you know, nod here. It's interesting. You've chosen for them all to be upside down. What's going on with that? Oh, that's my friend Jeff Sprung. That's a friend of mine who ran for office.
Yeah. Well, so I guess. Just a comment that those are the people who lost their particular election. That's all.
Yes. All right, take us through a couple more, and maybe we'll see if there are any other questions that are coming up.
Yeah. So let's see. keep going. Well, so the one from 2010, excuse me, 2008.
Oh, sure. Let me go back.
Sorry.
No worries.
Yes. So this one,
This is the one from the competition.
this is made out of fir.
Mm.
The lath in old houses, yeah, but so it's a simple cube, very easy to construct. There's 8 panels. They're all identical except for one has a door. So there's some, but it's fir lath. So it's got a rough texture to it. Old growth fir. You know, it was all the houses in Seattle built before World War II were built out of this stuff. So a friend was having a demolition of one of these, and I collected a bunch of lath and a bunch of the studs. So it's a single material. It's just Douglas fir in its natural state. When the plaster is applied to the lath, the lime whitewashes the fur a little bit. So I put that intentionally on the interior and the raw side on the exterior just to give it a slight distinction there. But it's to me, it's sort of simple and pure, and it has a power because of that. And it was a nice place to be in. You know, the election signs are kind of fun, but at the end of the day, plastic is not really a pleasant enclosure to sit in, whereas the wood, the natural wood with the lime, it was really very nice to sit in that. And I spent a whole day pulling little nails out of those things to get the darn thing to work.
It's truly beautiful.
These are labor intensive.
So it's interesting, you've got kind of yurts. There are things where you've experimented with angles, canvas sides, like the dairy look. Tell us just a little bit about the top of the SUKKAH. And, you know, there's an element of this, which of course, you know, that it commemorates, you know, the miraculous, sort of hut and harvest that's provided for us. And so what is there's a whole bunch of provisions. You have to be able to see the stars. Where do you get it? And for those of us that are on this call that maybe haven't built our own sukkah, could you just give us a little bit of advice on where can we start? These look obviously architecturally interesting, intriguing, challenging, but recycling is obviously something that we can all do, or we can collect, or we can use things that are in our homes to try to build some kind of structure. Is there something without a kit that we can all do to build a sukkah this year?
Well, you're a little late for this year, but I find if you at the lower right there, pallets are very simple to build with, and they work great. I was found in I thought they were all uniform size. They are not. And they tend to be reused. So you want to, you know, before you go pilfer someone's pallet pile, you want to ask them, because they're probably intended to be returned. But they go to, you know, that went together in a matter of an hour or so.
Interesting.
And just very simple. They're prefab panels, essentially, lightweight, just screw through the sides. And then I always like having gaps, so that when the interior is fully enclosed, it disconnects the people inside from the outside and vice versa. Passers-by hear you, but they can't see you. And I like having gaps, both for sunlight to filter through and for just a little bit of awareness of the occupants and the passers-by. So I would, you know, first time I would start with pallets, free, available, nice material, totally recyclable, compostable at the end.
So George,
available.
and what do you use? Where do you get your SUKKAH from? Where do you pick it up?
Looks like you've stalled a little bit for me.
Can you hear me again?
Oh yeah. So wherever I can get it, we don't really have a hedge or tree on our property, so I'm sort of I'm begging. I often had a big brush pile I would go raid. For years, I would go to the UW's greenhouse, the Botanic Department's greenhouse, and they had a big, you know, just brush pile, and very interesting exotic stuff in that pile. It was a lot of fun. I got permission from the head of the place, you know, can I come by? And he'd actually heard of Sukkot and went running inside, came back and gave me an etrog and said, you know, I've got one of these. And he's like, great. So that building got torn down. I've gone to Center for Urban Horticulture. This particular year, a friend of mine was trimming her back hedges, and so, you know, this
For
time of
being
year, there's
resourceful. Those are some great resources.
yeah.
Thank you.
I
So
mean,
I
it's,
have
you know,
someone,
you want to ask, right? You don't
Emily
trespass on
mentioned that her
people's
synagogue had a
property.
contest. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
So Emily mentioned in the chat that her synagogue had a contest building a tiny sukkot, like dioramas, since many of us can't build a real sukkah in an urban environment. They derived lots of connection and pleasure in making this. And that was, somebody made a Barbie sukkah, a PPE sukkah. I think it's fascinating, kind of masks. I did want to share with all of you, and Emily in particular, let me just go on my screen here. There is, of all of the entries, and I looked through, I sent you guys the link to this, only one entry in all of the Sukkah City actually indicated decorating. I showed this to George earlier. This was the only entry that actually showed a child and the idea of art and interaction. And this was a wraparound sukkah. It actually had a Southern architect who was talking more about the porches. It had a sort of Eames style influence going on. But the cotton canvases, which were part of sort of the window experience, were to be decorated by a child. And my experience, of course, of sukkah making is daisy chaining and bringing your gourds and all of those things, which really was not part of the competition at all. So from that synagogue experience, from that interactive, I love, Emily, what you put in the chat. And I think it's really amazing how, you know, it is a way for us to be creative, and I can't wait to see your PPE sukkah. I hope you'll make it and send some photos and post them. George, before we leave, maybe tell us just a little bit about the sukkah that you're sitting in, and what is this year's recycled sukkah about?
Yeah, so I'll have to go down to the sidewalk to give you an idea. I took a train ride across Montana in August, and I spent an entire day going past, let's see if I can get this thing to flip around, going past old farmhouses that were leaning over grade wood and collapsing and falling down. So you can see this one leans. It's actually got braces off to the right there. So that was sort of my inspiration. I'd already received decking boards from literally my next door neighbor. It was about as fortunate as I could get for sourcing materials. And then you'll notice that, so here it is in the back, it's sort of just leaning over. It's built in two halves. I had to have a practical way to have guests over during the pandemic. So there are 6 feet between the two halves. And our guests sit on the left and the hosts sit on the right. And it's a little bit far for convivial conversation, but we make it work. And that's sort of the nature of the pandemic this year, is you make do the best you can. And then the leaning is also, to me, somewhat symbolic of you know, the state of the economy, the state of society, the state of the environment. You know, we're sort of leaning over, heading towards collapse. And so that's I guess, a statement of its currency. And then also the two halves are pulled apart. They have these sort of frayed interlocking edges, and that to me represents both sort of the polarization of politics right now. So, you know, it's inspired by a number of things. And you know, it's a pretty nice place to be. I've got laurel over the host roof and cedar over the guest one. Again, just sort of a subtle way to indicate the differences between the two halves. And the response has been actually quite positive. People really like it. You'll notice that the height is just about 6 feet tall. So, you know, one has to sort of sit down and stoop. Once you're inside and you sit, you feel very enclosed. You can see the sky. You can see the sidewalk, and yet you're somewhat sheltered. So.
It's actually really amazing. I think you might have outdone yourself this year. And in terms of the sort of separate symbolism of the sort of almost as if you could push parts of the country back together with those fractured pieces of wood. Definitely think that there's an element, obviously the lore around the sukkah is that it was this dwelling while we were in, came out of Egypt, right? In Mitzrayim. And there's a sense that we have so much to repair right now. And I don't want to get too political, but I think that there's also interesting how you can see your own through it, right? That there is this permanent dwelling between it when you look through it from the front lawn. It's really amazing. And I'm so glad that you took a step back and shared it with us. And it's
Thanks.
a beautiful thing. You're really hopefully encouraging all of us to build a meaningful sukkah, and it's possible to do so. I just don't know if you have any other kind of parting words for us around the film, any perspectives that you want to give to having been a contestant, having made now 20 years of sukkahs that you've invested with meaning and family and, participation in communal meals. Is there something else that you'd like to share with us before I give everyone a couple of sign-off words? And thank you so much for being part of this conversation and continuing the relationship of Sukkot with the Jewish community and the JCC. And thank you so much. So George, what final parting word you have around the sukkah? Yeah,
I just feel that, don't take it too seriously, have fun. It's a celebration. It's an enjoyable, fun holiday. And to me, that's what guides me. There was a wonderful line towards the end of the film where someone says, why can't every sukkah be different? And I think that was my inspiration from day one, was looking around at the PVC pipes and the blue tarps. And as an architect saying, those are really unpleasant. Yes, I know they're practical and you reuse them, but why, I could do better, we could do better. Let's do something fun. And, it's stressful sometimes when I've got 2 weeks to go and I still don't have materials or I don't have an idea, but other years, like this year, it came together well. So I just have fun with it. And, I think they can all be different. And that's the nice part about the few rules and simplicity, is that there's a great variety as possible.
Well, I have my own hope because I enjoy so much that over the years, we've had conversations around recycled sukkahs, but hopefully one day when we can be back at the Strom Jewish Community Center, I would love to get the community involved with building recycled sukkahs. So maybe you can help me with that plan. So with that, I just wanted to thank everyone. The film is actually still available online for viewing through tomorrow. I think Jason Hutt, the director, I want to thank him so much for making it available to us. I want to thank you all for being here and wishing you all a happy, healthy holiday. But before you go, I just wanted to mention a couple of upcoming events. We've been spending a lot of time in our Zoom virtual world doing Zoom interviews and virtual conversations, and I have some incredible authors. And whether or not you're interested in political conversations, they clearly will be on the table. But coming up on November 1st, I'm really excited to have two authors, a young 22-year-old climate activist who wrote a book called 100% Solution. He left the Massachusetts state legislature. He ran on a climate solution, climate change platform. He was age 22, and now he's a full-time climate activist, and it's all about how you can make a difference. And he will be in conversation with Eitan Hirsch. This is backwards, sorry. Politics is for Power, about political hobbyism and how you can actually become a real political activist. And so I'm hoping that the two of them will have a wonderful conversation. This is going to be on November 1st. Please join us. You can learn more about all these programs at sjcc.org and go to the Arts and Ideas tab. We're also having an amazing conversation on November 10th, which is right after Election Day. And even if you're completely don't want to talk about politics, we might as well talk about women in politics, because that's always relevant, especially in this environment. And Yes, She Can is an incredible book that is written by a bunch of women who worked in the Obama White House. And Taylor Lustig, who is one of the co-authors, is going to be with Winebanks, MSNBC legal analyst, and Ross Reynolds from KUOW. They will be having a conversation about being young women working in the White House. And Jill Winebanks was a prosecutor, the youngest prosecutor for Watergate. And obviously there were many things that were said about her being a mini-skirted woman and all these other negative things. And she was quite a powerhouse prosecuting Nixon. And she now has written a book called The Water Girl. So please join us November 10th for that. And now we have our little throwaway one, but Cameron Douglas will also be with us. Cameron Douglas, Long Way Home, is Michael Douglas's son, and he is joining us on December 1st. All of this can be found on our website. I think our November programs will be published next week. We also have some other incredible programs coming up in October. I think our next author conversation is with Colin Quinn on October 8th. And then check it out, sjcc.org, and click on the Arts and Ideas tabs. I just want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank George Astrow. I want to say thank you and stay safe, healthy, and please take care and join us again, everyone. Goodbye. Thanks, George. Thanks so much for your time. Enjoy your Sukkot, everyone.
Yep.